The morning air in the coastal town carried the sharp scent of salt and damp wood. The streets were nearly empty when the postman, making his usual rounds, noticed an envelope lying at the base of the bulletin board outside the small general store. It bore no return address, and the paper was brittle with age, edges curling as if the sea air had already begun to claim it. The ink had bled into faint stains, the words emerging like bruises through fabric, uneven yet deliberate. The message was short, written in a hand that suggested both haste and purpose. Every promise made to the water must be fulfilled. There was no name, no signature, no trace of its origin. By noon, the envelope had been pinned to the board alongside local notices about yard sales and missing pets. People read it with uneasy curiosity, some laughing it off as a prank, others shaking their heads with suspicion. Yet the words lingered in their thoughts, refusing to fade as quickly as ordinary gossip. The town had seen its share of storms and losses, and beneath the casual remarks lay an undercurrent of discomfort. As night fell, small disturbances began to stir. Dogs barked without reason and refused to cross certain streets. Windows rattled, though the air was still, and residents swore they saw movements in the corners of their vision, pale flickers slipping away before they could be recognized. Curtains were drawn tighter, locks checked twice, but the unease persisted, like a chill beneath the skin. It was during these unsettled days that strangers arrived. They came quietly, carrying the weight of fresh beginnings, their eyes drawn to the weathered house that stood near the cliffs. Its walls leaned against the wind as though holding secrets within. To them, it promised solitude and renewal, a place where the noise of the world could not reach. Yet the town watched their arrival with a wary silence, for those who had lived there long enough understood that the house was not merely stone and wood, but part of a story older than any of them. And as the newcomers stepped across its threshold, the sea seemed to stir, as if recognizing their presence. The house greeted them with the weary groan of its floorboards and the musty breath of damp stone. Its walls seemed older than memory, worn by wind and salt, yet the windows opened to a sweeping view of the ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The newcomers accepted its imperfections as part of its charm, believing it could be the beginning of a quieter, more grounded life. Still, the air inside carried a heaviness, as though the house had been waiting too long for someone to return. Within the first days, subtle irregularities began to unfold. Mirrors lingered with reflections a heartbeat too long, shadows refusing to dissolve when their owners moved away. At dusk, the narrow hallways seemed to narrow further, breathing with the silence of something alive. The sound of the sea bled into the walls, its rhythm more insistent than the waves outside, as if the house itself echoed the ocean's pulse. One night, the unease sharpened. He woke to find the bed empty, the sheets cool where she had lain. Following faint sounds of bare feet against wood, he discovered her in the parlor before the largest window. The moonlight spilled across her figure, carving her form into something both fragile and otherworldly. She stood with her hands pressed to the glass, her eyes fixed beyond the black surface of the water. Her posture was not her own, her stillness unnerving, as if she were caught between waking and dreaming. Night after night, the pattern repeated. She wandered the corridors barefoot, her movements graceful yet hollow, as though guided by unseen hands. At times, she would lift her arms and sway gently, her body tracing a rhythm he could not hear, a silent dance against the backdrop of the sea. The more he watched, the more her gestures shifted from delicate to unsettling, each step carrying her further from the person he knew. It was not sleepwalking, nor was it fully her. It was a quiet submission to something vast and invisible that seemed to rise from the ocean itself, slipping through the walls to claim her in the moonlight. The town archive was housed in a narrow building with high windows that let in little light. Dust clung to the shelves, and the scent of old paper hung thick in the air, as if the walls themselves remembered too much. He had not planned to linger, but a thin folder tucked behind heavier binders caught his attention. Its cover was brittle, and its edges crumbled when touched, as though it resisted being opened. Inside lay a collection of yellowed reports and handwritten notes, their ink faded but still legible. The documents stretched across nearly a century, and each told of unexplained disappearances. The names differed, the decades shifted, yet the pattern repeated with eerie precision. Every case was bound to the same place, the house by the cliffs. Some reports carried statements from witnesses who swore they saw figures standing in the windows at night. The unnerving detail was that the figures never moved, always positioned near the residence, though no one else was ever found inside. Among the pages was a drawing, more unsettling than the words themselves. It depicted a woman with her face hidden beneath a curtain of long, dark hair. Beneath her image was a single phrase scrawled in uneven letters: "The keeper of the water's promises." The drawing seemed older than the rest, as if it had been copied and passed down, its presence less record than warning. He left the archive with the weight of the folder pressing against his thoughts. The ocean breeze felt colder that evening, carrying whispers through the narrow streets as he walked back toward the cliffs. When he returned home, the house greeted him with silence, broken only by the steady crash of waves against the rocks. She was there again, framed by the wide window, her body bathed in moonlight. This time, her movements were deliberate, no longer the aimless wandering of someone lost in a dream. Her arms rose and fell in patterns that suggested ritual, each gesture flowing with an ancient rhythm. Her body swayed as if answering a call, her outline merging with the shadows cast by the shifting light. He stood at the doorway, unable to look away, caught between awe and dread. The air seemed to thicken around her, the atmosphere charged with something that stretched far beyond the confines of the house. He recognized the shapes of her movements, though he did not understand them, as if she were reenacting fragments of a forgotten history. The image from the folder pressed into his mind, the veiled woman, the promise bound to water, and unease grew within him, threading through his fascination like a tightening cord. The air inside the house felt heavier with each passing night, as if the walls absorbed every unspoken thought and returned it as pressure against his chest. He tried to resist, to break the cycle, to force normality back into the rhythm of their lives. He locked the windows, lit lamps in every corner, and walked the halls until exhaustion overtook him. Yet the house responded to his defiance with silence that grew louder, a silence that pulsed like the heartbeat of something hidden. That night, his resistance seemed to reach a breaking point. She woke suddenly with a scream that cut through the stillness like shattered glass. Her body trembled violently, and when he caught her in his arms, her skin burned with the chill of seawater. It clung to her like an invisible shroud, the dampness seeping through his fingertips as though she had risen straight from the ocean's depths. Her eyes widened with terror, reflecting something unseen, and her breath came in broken gasps. Without a word, she pulled away from him, her steps unsteady yet purposeful. The moonlight fell across her as she reached the window, her silhouette sharp against the glass. Her movements were no longer the languid sway of a dreamer, but fierce and desperate, carrying the intensity of a ritual that had grown into something uncontrollable. Each gesture was sharper, heavier, filled with both longing and anguish, as though she fought against a force pulling her from within. He tried to call out to her, but the sound died in his throat as his gaze shifted to the reflection in the glass. Beside her stood another figure, its outline faint yet undeniable. Its limbs moved in perfect harmony with hers, mirroring her every motion with unsettling precision. The second form was faceless, blurred like a memory half remembered, but its presence carried weight, as if it had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. The floor beneath him trembled, a subtle shiver that grew into a violent quake. The walls groaned as fractures spread across the plaster, thin lines at first, then widening into jagged scars that crawled upward like veins. The house seemed to breathe in pain, its foundations straining as though something inside pressed against its boundaries, desperate to escape. The mirrors rattled in their frames, and dust fell in soft cascades from the ceiling. In that moment, he understood. They had crossed into something ancient and untouchable, something bound not to be disturbed. The promise whispered in the faded letters of the past was not metaphor, but law, and by ignoring it, they had set into motion a rupture that could not be undone. The figure in the reflection leaned closer to her, its presence merging with hers, and he felt a cold certainty spread through him. They had broken a boundary meant never to be crossed. The sky darkened until it seemed the world had been swallowed by a single endless cloud. The first raindrops fell heavy and cold, striking the earth with a weight that carried warning. Soon the rain became a torrent, and the ocean surged forward with a rage that felt almost deliberate. Waves hurled themselves against the cliffs, sending up plumes of spray that mingled with the sheets of water driving sideways through the air. The town along the shore dissolved into chaos, its streets becoming rivers, its houses bowing beneath the force of wind and water. Trees split and toppled, their roots exposed like torn veins, while rooftops vanished into the churning storm. Inside the house, every window rattled, and the walls groaned as though the structure itself feared collapse. He pulled at her arm, begging her silently to follow, to escape before the sea consumed them both. Yet she resisted with a strength he did not recognize, her body straining against his grip, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the ocean writhed under the lightning's glare. There was a hunger in her gaze, a pull that bound her more tightly to the storm than to him. Her lips moved with fragments of words drowned by the roar of wind, whispers that seemed not meant for his ears, but for the waves themselves. When the first surge of water crashed through the lower level of the house, he realized escape by ordinary means was impossible. The floor beneath them vibrated with the force of the tide pressing against the foundations, and the air filled with the sharp scent of salt and soaked wood. Rushing down into the cellar, desperate for shelter or answers, he saw the water already seeping between the stones, flooding the earth at his feet. It was then that his eyes caught something impossible, a seam in the wall where the stone looked older, darker, less touched by time. As the rising flood hammered against it, a hidden outline revealed itself, a door of ancient construction set into the rock, sealed yet waiting. With trembling hands he pushed, and the stones groaned as though resenting the intrusion. Beyond lay a narrow passage, a stair cut directly into the cliffside, spiraling downward into the earth. The air that poured out was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of the sea. He descended, his torch casting weak light against the rough walls, and found himself in a cavern where the heartbeat of the storm seemed to echo through stone and water alike. Symbols stretched across the walls, carved deep into the rock, their shapes echoing the strange illustrations he had uncovered in the archive. They shimmered faintly, as though responding to the storm's fury above. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, gathering in shallow pools that mirrored the glow of the carvings. The further he looked, the more it seemed the cave was alive, each mark and shadow part of a pattern too vast for him to comprehend. The thunder above shook the cavern, and water surged into the chamber, climbing higher with every passing breath. The storm was no longer a distant force. It was here, inside the earth, battering against stone as it had battered against the city. Standing there, with her presence looming behind him, he felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The storm was not a disaster to be survived. It was a summons, and in this place carved beneath the cliffs, their fate waited to be claimed. Morning broke with a sky of flawless blue, as if the violence of the night had been nothing more than a fever dream. The air was calm, carrying the faint scent of salt and damp earth, and the ocean rolled back to its rhythm of steady waves against the shore. The town emerged slowly from its silence, people stepping onto the streets to count what had been lost and what had endured. To their astonishment, the house by the cliffs remained standing, untouched by the destruction that had swallowed so many other homes. The walls were unbroken, the roof intact, and the windows gleamed with dew instead of salt. It was as though the storm had spared it deliberately, leaving it as a solitary witness among the wreckage. Inside, the rooms were still and silent. Dust and fragments of seaweed clung to the floorboards, but there was no sign of the couple who had made the house their own. In the center of the table lay a single sheet of paper, stained and warped as if by water. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic, and the words repeated a warning that chilled those who read it. Promises could not be broken. No name was signed, no explanation offered. Only that one sentence remained as a remnant of lives that had been swept away. When townspeople searched the cellar, they found only bare stone walls, smooth and unbroken. The hidden door was gone, and no marks remained of the carvings that once pulsed with strange life. It was as though the cave, the passage, and all that had been glimpsed within had sealed itself away, erasing every trace of intrusion. The place that had once whispered of secrets now gave nothing but silence, and silence itself seemed to carry weight. Arguments spread quickly through the town. Some claimed the newcomers had been lost in the flood, their bodies carried out into the vastness of the sea. Others whispered that the storm had not claimed them, but transformed them, binding them forever to the ancient covenant spoken of in fragments and warnings. The name of the keeper returned to their stories, the faceless figure said to guard every promise offered to the ocean. It was not long before rumors settled upon the shoreline. Fishermen swore that when the moonlight struck the waves in just the right way, shapes could be seen beneath the surface. Two figures appeared, standing side by side in the darkness of the deep. Their hands were joined as though in unity, yet their faces twisted into masks of anguish, mouths stretched in endless cries that no sound carried above the water. Some swore their eyes glowed faintly, catching the moonlight like shards of glass, filled with something between longing and fury. From that night onward, the town carried a single phrase, passed from one whisper to another, soft as the tide against the sand. It was not written, only spoken, and each voice trembled with the memory of storms past. The words were simple, but they bound every ear that heard them. Never go again.